So in this video, I'm going to show you how I pieced together and set up a $1,000 home theater system for two of my really close friends. In my opinion, $1,000 is a sweet spot as far as getting something that can sound awesome while at the same time being affordable for most people. Of course, home theaters can get as wildly as expensive as you want, but for a solid 5.1 system that can still provide you with lots of value and enjoyment at home when watching movies and listening to music, I think $1,000 is a great place to start. So let me break down the components I chose and why I chose them, go over some of the various considerations I had to make, show you some of the basic setup and install process, and finally we'll give the system a spin and let you know how it all worked out. So first things first, let's just take a quick look at the room setup here. You can see they have a nice 4K 65-inch TV in the corner, but that presents a problem because the speakers are going to be a little bit off-center. Luckily with this receiver, there's some calibration where we can adjust for the asymmetric placement of the speakers in the front. And then in the back here, we're going to put one in that corner and then one in this corner. Get them all ear level to where they're kind of pointing center into the room because we have a leather chair in the middle room and then the couch in the back of the room. So we'll get that all adjusted in the receiver settings. And you can see the devices we want to hook up here. They have an Xbox One, they have their DirecTV box, and not shown here is Apple TV we have tucked away in one of these drawers. And then finally they have a Google Chromecast plugged into the back of their TV, which we'll need to hook up as well. The first thing to decide on is what receiver to get, and embedded in that decision can be a lot of different considerations. So whether or not you want Dolby Atmos or DTX ability, how many channels you want, number and types of connection options for all your different devices, 4K pass-through, all kinds of things that can quickly get a bit overwhelming. Although some people watching this video might have some very specific needs, I bet most people are just going to need about the same basic things from a receiver that I did. So at a total budget of $1,000, I budgeted around $450 for a receiver, and any recently released receiver at that price point from any major manufacturer is going to pretty much future-proof you for at least the next 7 years and probably more for the typical home setup. Now, of course, you can spend a ton of time doing receiver research for days and days and weeks, but I have a really easy way to choose a good one, and that's just by going to a site called thewirecutter.com, where previously I would normally consult Consumer Reports. They don't really review receivers anymore. But the Wirecutter reviews all kinds of different hardware and electronics, and I always find their testing and conclusions to be pretty reliable for the most part, and way more comprehensive than I could do on devices as complicated as receivers. I trust them well enough, in fact, that a lot of times I'll just buy their best pick and be done with it, and that's what I did here, choosing the Denon AVR S710W, with the 720 being the slightly newer version, which just adds some improved Wi-Fi. But as I mentioned before, if you have a really specific requirement of some sort, like you might need 2 HDMI outputs instead of the typical one, maybe you want to power a projector and a television, then you may need to do some further research just to make sure your pick meets your specific criteria. But the Denon had everything I needed for this install. You get Bluetooth connectivity for mobile devices, 4K pass-through, good color subsampling, multiple HDCP 2.2 ability so that all your HDMI ports are going to be compatible with the number of increasing 4K capable boxes coming out. You get 6 HDMI connections, plenty of power to push speakers, costing even 3 or 4 times what we're going to spend here. So there's one other consideration I had for choosing this receiver, and that was that we wanted the ability to be able to power a couple stereo speakers that we plan on installing outside on the back deck. So a dual zone ability with the receiver was important, and I'll talk a little bit more about the outdoor setup later in the video. So with the solid receiver now picked out, next up was to choose some speakers. Now, of course, speakers can be a lot more tricky to pick out. It's something that I did spend some more time researching, and just there's so many different brands and stuff, sizes, everything else to choose from. But what I ended up choosing were the Take Classic 5.1s from a company called Energy. Now, this is a satellite subwoofer combo, which I already know no serious home theater enthusiast, even including myself, would normally go with the satellite setup. As we all know, full-size speakers are always going to give you a more full and dynamic sound and range, especially for home theater and even music. But as I mentioned before, I had some constraints with this setup, and if I wasn't balancing space and aesthetic concerns, I would have certainly went with these Andrew Jones design pioneers. In my research of home theater speakers in this price range, I couldn't find a single bad review on these guys online, and they just seem to be one of those rare products that punch way above their weight. But as far as compact satellite subwoofer combos, I don't think you'll find a better bang for your buck than these Energy 5.1s, regardless of your budget. Just taking a little closer look at the speakers, you can see they have a very reflective piano black finish, and they use 3-inch drivers with 3/4-inch tweeters. They believe they're a titanium compound poly. And they have a couple key mounting options in the back, and they use nice speaker posts, and they have a bass port on the bottom. So if you take a look at the center channel speaker, it's slightly larger, and they have the bass ports facing the front, and it does give you 10 lower hertz frequency response compared to the satellites, as you can see here from the specs on the screen. And you can just pause this if you want to look at the detail. But otherwise, it uses the same speaker cones and configuration. There's a shot of the rear speaker mounting holes here, which I wanted to show you because I originally bought some center speaker channel mounts thinking I was going to just hang it directly underneath the TV, but it ended up ruining the aesthetics of the TV, so I opted against it. So moving on to the sub. The subwoofer is a 200 watt downfiring sub with a really nice and solid looking 8-inch woofer on the bottom. It uses a rib surround, which helps with excursion and just being a little bit tighter. And the bass port's located on the front of the unit. Now it's rated to play down to 33 Hz, and the whole thing weighs just under 20 pounds. You can see the relative size of it here. It's not a huge sub, being only an 8-inch, so it fits nicely in small and medium-sized rooms, which is what we're going to use it in, and it's pretty inconspicuous. Now looking on the back, there are some cheap speaker level inputs here, which you would never really use in a proper surround sound setup. And you do have a couple knobs here on the back. One is to control the volume, and then you have the variable low pass filter to let you blend it better with the satellites and your specific room situation, which is a nice feature. There's also a phase switch to make up for your different room acoustics as well, and a full on-off auto mode switch, and your sub inputs here as well. So this is the ESW8, and they make an ESW10, which is their 10-inch subwoofer. And you can add that if you just want to add an extra sub, if your room's big or just wanted a lot more bass. And it's nice because this receiver is 7.2 channels, so it can output to 2 separate subs. So now with about $850 spent, that leaves us with $150. With that, I bought a 35-foot audio cable for the sub so I could test out optimal locations around the room. Some new extra long and flexible HDMI cables to make sure I had enough length when I was rewiring all the components. Then I picked up a couple hundred feet of speaker wire. Since we're going to run the wire in the cross space, I wanted to make sure I had enough length. And for these speakers and setup, I got 14 gauge speaker wire, which is the thinnest cable I would ever recommend for speakers. The lower the gauge, the thicker the wire. And this should be more than fine for the length of run and wattage of the speakers we're using here. Then I got some speaker stands to mount the satellites to the wall. These ones from Monoprice can be adjusted horizontally and vertically, and they're only $4 a pair, so a really good deal. And finally, I got some banana plugs for the speaker wires. So if you don't already have some good speaker crimps, I definitely recommend investing in them. It just makes the job a lot easier. One thing I will mention about this particular speaker wire is if I had to do it again, I'd probably just get the bare copper wire because it's a little bit easier to work with, because you don't have to use this insulating shield, you don't have to rip that off, and then there's a string you got to deal with. It was just kind of a pain in the butt to work with. I recommend using banana plugs because it makes connecting and reconnecting speaker wire a lot easier, and you're sure to get a solid connection every time. If you've never used them before, they're all a little different, but mainly what you do with these ones is you unscrew them and then fan the speaker wire out over the base, and then you tighten the connector down over the top of them. And then you can see it becomes a real secure connection. Then with the binding post on the receiver, all you have to do is slip it in the hole instead of trying to loop them around and get inside the ring and then tighten them down on the post, which gets pretty annoying over time. So next up, I temporarily hooked up all the speakers downstairs so I could just go ahead and break them in. Now people debate whether or not to do this, especially for this price point speakers, but I did it because the manual suggested to. Now the manufacturer suggests to break them in for 50 hours, which is about what I did, just setting them up here playing different movies and music at a low volume over a couple days. Now I have to admit it was tough to resist the urge to just immediately crank them up to see how they sounded, but hopefully by doing this it allowed us to get the most life and sound out of the speakers in the long run. Then I finally laid out all the speakers in the living room to roughly where I was going to have them installed, and then I ran enough speaker wire out just to make sure I had enough slack to run it down through the crawl space. So there really is no avoiding just having tons of wires everywhere when hooking up a home theater system. As you can see how much of a nest you end up getting behind the TV and receiver here. Now, in order to get rid of some of this clutter, I did a couple things. First was that I drilled a hole in the back of their media cabinet so that I could hide some of the components in the drawer. And just a side note here, if you wonder why I scuffed this whole back up, it's because I'm an idiot and I didn't really know you're supposed to use a regular drill bit in conjunction with the circular bit in order to stabilize it. Now, putting too many components in a drawer can generate a lot of heat, so you want to be kind of careful. Don't stuff too many in there and stack them too high. Make sure you aren't blocking any of their vents, and just make sure they have some room to breathe. Secondly, I got one of these plastic cable management boxes so that I had somewhere to stuff all the wires and power strip for all the equipment. Then I drilled a couple different circular openings in the top of it so that I could have the wires going through the top of the box and entering through the top rather than the sides. And this concealed the wires entry points behind the cabinet so that you wouldn't really see the cables coming into the sides from the floor. This worked really well. You can see I was able to fit the power bricks, plugs, and just a lot of wires in here, concealing it pretty well from pretty much every visible angle in the living room. And now the only time you see any wires is if you look directly behind the cabinet and receiver. I also ended up wiring their setup a little differently than I would prefer, where I ran all the HDMI cables through the HDMI connection box that came with their TV, and then outputting one single audio cable output to the receiver. I did this mainly because the remote we wanted to use was this upgraded DirecTV one, which is a lot better than the normal stock remote. It has a lot better layout, faster response, and it's RF, so you don't have to aim it at the box, and I was able to just put the DirecTV box in the drawer. But it's not a true universal remote. It can basically control the cable box and the TV, and that's it. So we're switching inputs via the television instead of using the receiver, and I wouldn't normally recommend this. It does make controlling the system much simpler, but the trade-off is you don't get to see the receiver on-screen menu displays. But hopefully we'll fix this all in the future with the Logitech Harmony remote. Next, I got the speakers mounted how I wanted, and for aesthetic reasons, I didn't mount the front, left, and back speakers to the walls. Instead, I set one up here on the fireplace mantle, and then one on the back side table. Now, typically, you would want all your speakers in a basic surround sound setup to just be all on the same axis and plane and level with your ears from your normal seating position. But in this case, having the front left speaker elevated didn't have much negative impact, and in testing, I actually thought it blended the sound better across the front speakers since it was high up and level with the TV, but it made the audio sound feel more like it was in line with the TV rather than 2 feet below it. Also, it filled the room better with music, especially when we were standing in the kitchen or walking around the house, since one of the speakers was always up at ear level. And this offset position worked surprisingly well in this room, and I was really happy with it. I also situated the sub in the front corner of the room underneath the TV, and then got everything all cleaned up and put away. And finally, it was time to update the receiver over the network and get all the settings right, just to make sure everything was working as it should, and that all the connections were correct and hooked up. Now, I won't bore you with all the receiver menus, but I would suggest allocating a good amount of time just going through all the options to see what's available. And you can use the Odyssey guided setup and microphone that are included with this receiver. They do a really great job of walking you through the whole tweaking process. Or of course, you can manually go about it yourself to adjust the things like speaker sizes and distances, boosting the center channel output for clearer dialogue, and setting crossover points to match your specific speakers, etc., etc. Either way, spending some time getting everything dialed in will definitely give you a noticeable improvement in sound. Now, I'm going to try to convey how good the system sounded, but without you being able to hear it in person, it's a pretty hard thing to do. But I found in doing previous speaker reviews, if you don't at least play some amount of audio, people get pretty upset. So what I thought is that I'd at least play back a couple clips and compare it to some other sources like a phone and then the stock TV speakers. And hopefully this at least gives you a relative feel for how much improvement the surround sound system brought. But please just try to keep in mind I'm only using the tiny mic on my video camera, which really just can't do a great job in capturing all the sound and doesn't do the system very much justice at all. But for what it's worth, here you go.
Your next race will be at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, located in beautiful Barcelona, Spain.
So I hope that gives you a little sense of how these sounded. I was initially worried that these speakers were going to just be too small for this room and that I wouldn't end up being happy with them based on my experience with other small speakers, but they definitely lived up to the positive reviews. Dialogue is clear and easy to understand, they're well matched and balanced and really sound excellent with music. My buddy says it's the first set of speakers he's owned where he's had to turn them down due to loudness and not because they distort. They're really happy with the setup and I was very impressed with them for the size and the price. I definitely recommend. Before I go, I did want to just do a quick review of these outdoor monoprice speakers that I added to their system. These are all-weather speakers with 5¼ inch drivers, really the perfect size to enjoy in a small backyard, and they're less than $50 for the pair. So I hooked these up to the Denon, which uses up the final 2 channels on the back to take advantage of the second zone on the receiver. I then run a Chromecast audio into the RCA inputs in the back. Now, one big drawback of the Zone 2 on this particular receiver is that it won't play optical audio input sources into the second zone for whatever reason. It's kind of lame and a bit of a bummer. With the Chromecast audio as the source, though, they can stream music from any mobile device and have it play outside and inside simultaneously. And there's separate volume control for both. The Chromecast audio is nice too because if they want to add additional speakers in other parts of their house, they can just connect additional Chromecasts as needed to get true multi-room audio. I did a video about that if you want to check it out, actually. Now, the receiver will let you play any source inside the house while streaming music outside. For example, you can watch TV inside and music outside, or Xbox inside and music outside. So that's kind of nice. And these outdoor speakers play plenty loud and sound pretty great, I'd have to say. Obviously, you aren't going to get huge bass. If you need Moss watts outside, though, they do make some affordable 6½ inch outdoor speakers as well if you want to check those out. But anyways, that's it. I hope you guys liked the video. Please remember to give a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching to the end, and y'all take care.